You're walking beside someone you know, and without either of you saying anything, one person starts adjusting to the other's pace. Maybe it happens on a neighborhood sidewalk, maybe in a parking lot, on the way into a store, or during a longer walk where the difference becomes harder to ignore. One person keeps moving at the same comfortable rhythm. The other shortens the stride just a little. It is easy to assume that difference belongs mostly to the legs. But an ordinary walking pace is doing more than showing how quickly your feet can move. It is showing the speed your body can comfortably support. Walking asks your muscles to produce force, your balance to keep you stable, and your joints to move through each step. Sustained walking also depends on oxygen reaching working tissue continuously. The American Heart Association describes cardiorespiratory fitness as an integrated ability to bring oxygen into the body, move it through the circulation, and use it during physical work. A comfortable walking pace reflects that larger partnership. Several systems have to support the same movement at the same time. If you like finding the physiology hidden inside ordinary things you do every day, subscribe to The Quiet Heart. That is exactly the kind of question we investigate here. Researchers have tried to measure how much information may be hiding in a usual walking pace. In one study involving more than 800 adults aged 70 and older, participants completed a 400-meter walk at their usual pace and also underwent cardiopulmonary exercise testing, which directly measured aerobic fitness. They were not being asked to race. The walking test was designed around a pace they could normally sustain across that standardized distance. People who maintained a faster usual pace tended, on average, to have higher measured aerobic fitness. That does not mean a walking pace can replace a clinical exercise test. It also does not mean that any casual walk around the house, through a parking lot, or across a supermarket can be turned into a personal aerobic fitness score. The research setting matters, but the finding still tells us something useful. The distance matters too. 400 meters is long enough that the body has to support repeated steps rather than produce one brief burst of speed. That makes the test different from asking someone to hurry across a room for a few seconds. It still does not recreate every real-world walk, but it captures something closer to sustained mobility than a maximum speed test would. The researchers were looking at a relationship, not creating a pass or fail score. The relationship was meaningful, not perfect. So, even in a standardized setting, pace gives information with limits. A sustained pace that looks ordinary from the outside can carry real information about the capacity available underneath it. That capacity is not simply how hard the heart can beat. It is the amount of sustained physical work the body can support while oxygen is being delivered and used. A person with more available aerobic capacity generally has more room between quiet rest and the upper end of what can be sustained. That extra room matters in ordinary life. Walking across a large parking lot is one demand. Carrying groceries while doing it adds another. A hill changes the demand again. Most people never calculate the pace they use for those things. The body settles into one. Too slow, and you may naturally speed up. Too demanding, and you begin adjusting without making a formal decision about it. That self-selected rhythm is part of what makes walking so interesting as a functional clue. Height can change stride length. Habit changes rhythm. Terrain changes speed. A crowded store is not the same as an open path, so comparing yourself with the fastest person on the sidewalk misses the point. The more useful question is what a familiar, sustainable pace represents inside the body. And that question becomes clearer when you separate capacity from cost. Suppose two people are walking side by side at the same speed. From across the street, their walks may look almost identical. For one person, that pace may use only a modest portion of the aerobic capacity available to them. They could keep going, walk farther, handle a hill, or carry something without getting close to their limit. For the other, the same speed may already be using much more of what they can comfortably sustain. The visible pace is the same. The reserve behind it is not. Researchers have seen evidence of this difference in older adults. In a small study of people between 60 and 88 years old, habitual walking speed was strongly related to measured aerobic capacity. The slower walkers also tended to use a larger share of their available aerobic capacity during their normal walking pace than the faster walkers. Because the study was small, those exact proportions should not be treated as rules for everyone. But the physiological idea is useful. Walking uses some of the capacity you have available. The closer ordinary activity comes to what you can comfortably sustain, the less reserve remains for whatever comes next. A longer block, a slight incline, a bag in one hand, A conversation while you walk? An airport corridor that seems to keep going? The same pace can cost two people very different amounts of their available capacity. Reserve is not something you can see directly from the sidewalk, and it is not something this video is asking you to calculate. The point is conceptual. Two identical-looking walks can place different demands on two different people. Once you see that, speed by itself becomes less informative. The better question is how much room seems to remain beyond the pace your everyday life already requires. Even then, walking speed cannot belong to cardiovascular fitness alone. Consider someone with a painful knee. They may shorten the stride because each step is uncomfortable, even when aerobic capacity has not changed very much. Someone who feels less secure on uneven ground may choose a slower pace because balance has become the limiting factor. Reduced leg strength can change how forcefully the body pushes forward. Changes in coordination, vision, or sensation can make a person more deliberate about foot placement. None of those situations makes walking speed meaningless. They show why visible pace cannot be assigned to one organ. Sometimes cardiovascular capacity may be an important part of the result. Sometimes another limitation may dominate. Often more than one factor is involved. That is also why copying someone else's speed tells you very little about your own cardiovascular fitness. The person beside you may be taller, stronger, more practiced, more comfortable on that surface, or simply working with a different amount of reserve. The outside appearance can be simple, even when the physiology underneath it is not. When you think about walking now, which seems more useful to notice? Speed itself, how sustainable the pace feels, or whether your familiar pace has changed? Tell me which one in the comments. You do not need to share a speed, diagnosis, or any personal medical information. That leaves a practical question. If pace is informative but not specific, what kind of change is actually worth paying attention to? Population studies give one part of the answer. A systematic review of studies in adults over 60 found that walking speed was associated with cardiovascular risk factors and cardiovascular events. But the studies used different walking tests, different distances, and different thresholds, so there is no universal speed you can use at home to decide whether your cardiovascular system is healthy. An association does not mean that walking slowly causes cardiovascular disease. It means walking speed can carry useful population-level information while still being too nonspecific to diagnose one person. That distinction matters in everyday life because a single slow walk can have many ordinary explanations. A hot afternoon can change your pace. So can poor sleep, carrying bags, an uneven sidewalk, temporary soreness, or simply having a long day behind you. Context matters. The strongest observation is usually not a comparison with a stranger or with a chart. It is a change against your own familiar function in similar situations. A neighborhood route you have walked many times gives more context than one unusually slow trip through a crowded airport after a poor night of sleep. Even then, the goal is not to diagnose yourself from the trend. The value is that a clear functional change gives you something specific to describe instead of a vague sense that something feels different. A persistent, unexplained change across familiar walks is different. If a distance that used to feel ordinary now regularly requires more effort, more pauses, or a noticeably slower, sustainable pace, that can be useful information about function. It still does not identify the cause, but it gives you a better observation to bring into a conversation with a qualified healthcare professional. Instead of saying only, "I am slower," you can describe what actually changed. This distance used to feel ordinary, and now I need to stop. Or, I can still walk it, but I cannot keep the same comfortable pace I used to. Those observations preserve context without turning you into your own diagnostician. At that point, the value of walking pace becomes much more human than a number. Think about what extra reserve allows you to do. Walk through an airport without searching for a chair halfway to the gate. Keep up during a museum visit. Carry a few groceries from the car. Stay beside someone during a neighborhood walk without needing to stop as often. Move through a travel day without planning every next place to sit. None of those activities is a fitness test. They are parts of independence. That is why the goal is not to become a fast walker for the sake of a number. The goal is to have enough usable capacity for the life you want to keep doing. If you want more calm, evidence-led explanations of cardiovascular health, through the abilities that matter in ordinary life. Subscribe to the quiet heart. A persistent, unexplained decline in that familiar capacity can be reasonable to discuss with a qualified healthcare professional, especially when it begins interfering with activities that used to feel manageable. Symptoms can also change the situation completely. If walking or other exertion brings significant chest pressure or discomfort, severe or unexplained shortness of breath, fainting, or symptoms that could represent a medical emergency, the important question is no longer how fast you are walking. Those symptoms need prompt medical attention. In the United States, call 911 for a suspected emergency. For most of this investigation, though, the useful lesson is quieter. You do not need to race a stopwatch. You do not need to copy someone else's speed. And you do not need to turn the sidewalk into a laboratory. A familiar pace is worth understanding because it connects physiology to function in a way everyday life makes visible. Now go back to the two people on the sidewalk. At the beginning, one person simply looked faster and the other slower. That difference looked simple. Now it carries more meaning. Pace tells a story without telling the whole story. And after 60, the most useful part of that story may be how much everyday life your available reserve still lets you do comfortably.